32 economists distorted facts in order to prove that rent control was a net positive. Well, they were dead wrong. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have an interesting article for you today, and it's going over the fact that, hey, there were 32 economists who they wrote this letter, and they were like, oh, rent control is a positive. Rent control works out great for everyone involved, and we should have nationwide rent control for everybody. Well, you know what? This is a joke. It's an absolute joke. These people have no clue what they're talking about. They're dead wrong. And the studies that they used to come up to this conclusion actually came up with the exact opposite conclusion in them. And that's what's covered in this article. Okay, it's actually quite an interesting article. And I wanted to point this out. I know that the people who watch this, they're landlords. They already know that rent regulations, they don't work. Okay, I don't know any landlord who actually thinks that rent regulation is a net positive. I know there's landlords who can operate within the system and still make money, but they would make even more money without it. And they understand that, hey, this is not the optimal system in order to provide housing for people. They know this, but they just have figured out ways to work within it. Okay. So yeah, it's an interesting article. I really wanted to cover this. Rent control is one of my least favorite things, and that's why I cover it so much. So before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like and subscribe button, maybe leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think. So what do you think of the fact that 32 different economists are claiming that rent control is a net positive? Do you think that's hard to believe? Do you think they might be politically motivated? Okay, that's my personal belief. I believe that a lot of people, right, they're idealists and they have politics in mind, and rather than looking at data and information with the eye of, okay, well, you know what, the data doesn't lie, so this doesn't work and we have to find a better solution. Instead, they're like, no, we're going to force the data, we're going to use it to make to prove our point. We're going to force even stats that don't make, it doesn't make any sense. Okay, it doesn't make any sense. We're going to but anyway, let me get into this article. I'm going to go on a ramble rant here, and the article has all the information I need in order to prove this point. Anyway, let me get into it. This article is coming from businesswire.com, and it says, fact check: 32 economists distort the record on rent regulations. And a lot of the fact checks that you read out there, they are basically the opposite of this one here, right? They are from a far left leaning source, and they're trying to attack, a more conservative piece of information because of feelings, because they don't like that information, right? Well, this is the opposite of that. This is a or actual look at the facts, and then fighting against BS feelings arguments. Anyway, let me get into it. A recent letter from 32 economists purported to show empirical evidence that rent control is a net positive. These economists come from a variety of disciplines, including political economists and labor economists, but the majority appear to have limited to no experience as housing economists. The National Multifamily Housing Council wholeheartedly agrees that millions of households in this country face an affordability crisis, but we cannot let disinformation feed false narratives about decades of fact-based evidence of the negative policy consequences of rent regulations. Yeah, and so yeah, of course they get some economists in there, but none of them actually know or participate in the housing market. Funny how that works, right? Kind of like the politicians who pass all these regulations on landlords. They don't own any properties, or the ones who do own properties, right? They just happen to be outside of the area where they would be regulated by the laws that they are putting into place. So anyway, let me continue. Setting the record straight, here are complete conclusions from the very article cited by The Economist that claim support rent regulations. Okay, and now they're going to go over the list of the conclusions from these articles, right? And it's kind of funny because it's like a broken record here. Diamond and McQuaid and Kean. Thus, while rent control prevents displacement of incumbent renters in the short run, the lost rental housing supply likely drove up market rents in the long run, ultimately undermining the goals of the law. And as I mentioned before, rent control, yeah, it works great temporarily for the people who when the law is implemented, the people who already live in the units, right? They hit the jackpot because they don't have to deal with big rent increases. But for the people in the future, maybe 5 years from now, maybe 20 years from now, who are looking for housing, they won't be able to find it because developers stop building, landlords stop providing housing, and the people who live in the housing already, they aren't moving because they already have a good deal. So it makes it very difficult for people to find housing, and so the only winners are the people who already live in the housing. Munch and Svarer, 2002. Therefore, it is concluded that rent control has a very unfortunate effect on household mobility, and the efficiency of the housing market is seriously hampered. A perhaps even more serious consequence of reduced mobility in the housing market is the spillover to the labor market. And by mobility, they mean that people who have rent controlled units, they move way, way less often. And it's obvious why. If you move, you lose your rent controlled place. So imagine that you have a place and you're renting it for far below market rent. Let's say the market rate is $1,000 a month and you're paying $200 a month, right? So you're paying, considerably less than what the market rate is charging for your unit, right? Well, are you going to give that unit up? Are you going to move, somewhere else, even if you get a better job? I mean, you're not going to look for a better job if it's too far away because then you have to give up that basically subsidized housing at this point. Okay, so yeah, it hurts the labor market because there's less mobility in people with their jobs. There's less mobility of people who are living in housing. And this is an obvious side effect that everybody knows. Everybody should know about. Ambrosius et al. 2015. The intended impacts of New Jersey rent control ordinances over a 40-year period seem minimal when compared to cities without regulations. Housing activists and policymakers need to look at additional kinds of approaches to address the post crash rental housing affordability crisis. So, yeah, they looked at places in New Jersey and they were like, yeah, this rent control within the places who have rent control compared to the places that don't have rent control, right? Housing affordability, there was very, very minimal impact, if any. Okay, it didn't help. That's like you're sitting here and you're like, oh well, it'll make a huge difference. No, no, and they have that in a study proving the fact already. Altor, Palmer, and Pathak, 2014. We conclude that the decontrol led to changes in the attributes of Cambridge residents and the production of other localized amenities that made Cambridge a more desirable place to live. To help, so what they're saying is basically that um, when they took away artificial price controls, right, it actually changed the attributes of the people who lived in the area and made it a better place. Okay. So I know people don't want to hear this, right? But gentrification actually makes places better. Okay. When people who have more money move into an area and they improve it, it actually makes that area nicer. It makes it have less crime. It makes it have more amenities. It makes it cleaner. That's what happens when people with higher incomes move into an area and it becomes, gentrified. And the alternative is that the place remains poor, run down, zero services, and higher crime. And you have to ask yourself, well, which one would I rather have? Which one long term is better? And in the minds of some people, they think that having a large poor population in a city is a good thing, and it isn't. It is not a good thing. Okay, we can look at cities with overwhelming amounts of poverty in them, and yeah, they really are struggling. I mean, just we can look at, the prime example is Detroit. Okay, it is overwhelming amounts of poverty within the city, and they complain even then that there's too much gentrification, and I'm like, really? This place, I've been there many times. Okay, so I don't believe there's too much gentrification within Detroit. Anyway, the last bullet point they have here is to help combat the country's housing affordability challenges. What do the academics cited by the authors propose? From Diamond, McQuaid, and Kean, these results highlight that forcing landlords to provide insurance against rent increases can ultimately be counterproductive. If societies desire to provide social insurance against rent increases, it may be less distortionary to offer this subsidy in the form of government subsidies or tax credits. This would remove landlords' incentives to decrease the housing supply and could provide households with the insurance they desire. So yeah, they say that the best alternative would be to provide government subsidies or tax credits. Okay, and that would encourage landlords more often to provide lower or more affordable housing. And I'm in agreement with that because, simply put, if you want developers to build affordable housing in a major city, they're not going to be able to make money off of it without government subsidies and tax credits. They're just not. Okay, that's why most of the new housing is going to be luxury if they, do want to develop anything. So that's government should step up. They should step up and then start really thinking about what they can do to really help make housing more affordable, because rent control doesn't work. All the studies they say that, and these 32 economists who are saying otherwise, they are politically motivated to try to sway people to believing what they're saying, hoping that they don't do any sort of research on their own.